And welcome back to the Try, Fail, Learn podcast, the podcast all about professionals and the lessons they've learned through the years. In today's episode, we have Rex Allen, the founder and creative director of Stoke. So without further ado, let's get into it. Rex, thank you so much for being on the show. If you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and introduce yourself and let's get into it.
Yeah, so I'm Rex Allen, career mechanical engineer turned marketer and content creative and branding guy. So I gave up the old engineering career about a year ago and went full-time in my own business, running a business called Stoke. So creative agency for brands, doing all sorts of branding and content. So stoked to be here on the show and hang out with Josh and kind of chat a little bit.
Yeah, man. That's cool. So the reason I wanted to have you on this show specifically, you and I connected and had a call, was it 3 months ago? It wasn't that long ago.
Like that.
Yeah. So we were just chatting about, marketing in general, and your story stuck out. And I've met like 2 or 3 people after I spoke with you who have a similar path, but going from an engineering background to a marketing background. And in my head, those seem completely unrelated and not at all similar. So let's talk about, college, education. Let's talk about the reason why you went and got a mechanical engineering degree. Just go ahead and fill us in with college life.
So when I served a mission for my church, 2 years in Russia. And when I guess before that, I had decided to become a mechanical engineer for some reason. Nope. I don't know. It was just kind of like planted a bug in my head, right? A lot of people that end up being engineers come from engineer families, right? Their dad's an engineer, their grandpa's an engineer. Like they're just used to having engineering in their life.
Okay.
But I did not, right? So like my dad liked to tinker with things and I grew up liking to tinker with things. But as far as like engineering goes, there wasn't really any engineering in my immediate family. I've got cousins that are software engineers, and, we're all a bunch of smart people or whatever, so like going into that engineering field and having to do a ton of math and all that work, like wasn't that intimidating. But I remember some guy came over to my house that my parents knew or something and like talked to me about doing engineering in school. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a cool idea. So like I started off as a freshman and like started taking engineering classes and like never really looked back until, 15 years down the road. I've looked back pretty seriously now, but back then I was like full steam ahead, becoming an engineer. So I lucked out and I started working as an intern, an intern that they treat like a engineer on the team, during my freshman summer of college, right? So I got to work my whole way through college as an engineer, which was really cool. And my whole engineering career was very design focused, right? So developing products and being creative and doing that creative design stuff, which kind of got the wheels turning for where I ended up now, right? So, all through college doing creative design, product design, machine design, all sorts of design stuff. And then when I graduated college and got out into the engineering field, I jumped out of the medical device industry and got into firearms engineering, developed pistols and silencers and rifles and all sorts of cool stuff there.
Yeah.
And in developing products for an industry that I was passionate about and an active participant, as a shooter myself, I always jumped at opportunities to go hang out with marketing teams, whether that was doing video production for product releases or helping out with creating 3D assets to go along with things like that. So I just kind of had a knack for being that liaison between the engineering team and the marketing team to help them create assets. With a quick hand wave of like how I got from there to now, it was just like I hung out with marketing teams inside companies and kind of realized that they had all the fun and they did the stuff that I liked to do. So on my free time, instead of reading engineering books and getting really, really good at engineering, I still think I was pretty decent, but like I was teaching myself the Adobe Creative Suite and all this other stuff that, a typical engineer wouldn't care about at all. Right. And
right.
That just kind of led to this natural progression towards the creative world rather than the engineering world.
Yeah. Something that I didn't realize, and I talked to somebody recently where they said, oftentimes when you talk to an engineer, they are very creative people. And on the surface, when you think of engineering, you think, somebody who's really good at math and very, straight-laced and by the book, and there's not much deviation. When you think of somebody who does design, you think of the opposite in every possible way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like very emotional, very just guided by the way they feel. But when you
Mhm.
look at what an engineer does, and I think you would echo this, there is a lot of creativity in problem solving. And in mechanical
Yeah.
engineering, my best friend is an electrical engineer, worked for Lockheed Martin, and now he owns his own business building out camper vans. Dude's using a lot of creative problem solving, trying to fit a whole house
Yeah.
inside of a van. So, what do
Yeah.
you think the main keys of your engineering degree and also your time as an engineer? How do you think that plays into? You talked about being around people who do design, but what do you think the
Yeah.
skills that you developed there as an engineer? Which ones best played into now developing Stoke?
Yeah, so I think as an engineer, all through engineering school, I mean, an engineering education doesn't really give you a whole lot of depth into any subject that you study, right? It's all kind of a surface level of like, this is the world of engineering. And inside any facet of any of these classes you take, you could go 10 miles deep, getting
Hmm,
PhD level degrees,
sure,
getting really specified in that one thing, right? So in that kind of surface level technical degree that you get as an undergraduate in mechanical engineering, you you really focus on applying your problem solving skills to problems within the subset of each class that you take, right? So that overall education that you get is really about identifying problems, applying the scientific method to break down those problems, figure out what you have control of, what you don't know, and then go solve for what you don't know, right? So
sure,
that skill is so ingrained into your brain after 5 years of just like plugging through that over and over and over again to all of these different problems that you get really good at solving problems, right?
right,
And when presented with any new situation or a new problem, whether that's an engineering problem or a design problem or a working with a client problem, if you have enough time, you can apply that whole method to it and find solutions that work, right? Using that kind of same education.
sure, yeah,
A lot of times when you're running your own business, you don't have enough time to go a mile deep on every little problem, right? So as best you can, you use those skills that are just kind of dormant in there to kind of make your best way through it. But I think being a creative problem solver, probably more than anything, just having the confidence that any situation that I'm presented with, I can figure out a way to get it done. And having that mentality has helped me be successful as I take on project work with clients that are kind of all over the map as far as industries they're in or the type of work that they need help with. I'm pretty able to fluctuate in and out of all sorts of different creative facets to help clients out.
right. Something that I struggle with is this aspect of ownership. Whenever you're on a team and somebody has a small portion to play in a product from the time that it's being conceptualized to developing to then released, right? What no matter what it is, um, people tend to be motivated if they feel an ownership in that product. And I
Yeah.
don't know the engineering process. I don't know how it works in engineering firms. So this is completely a completely ignorant question. But would you say that, right? Because with Stoke, you are there from the beginning of the idea isn't even born yet to a finished product, and you see
Yeah.
it through from beginning to end. As you know, I know you're trying to hire your first employee here with Stoke, but really everything is done. Rex Allen has complete control over everything and does it all. But with
Yeah.
engineering in a firm, do you get that same kind of beginning to end satisfaction of ownership?
Yeah, I think a lot of that depends on the size of the company you're working in, right? So we're talking about ownership, we're talking about your effort and I guess influence into what a product ends up becoming, right? So if you're working for Boeing, you
Hmm.
have no influence over what the ultimate result of the 747 looks like, right?
None, right?
You have some control over like this bolt that holds the wheel onto the axle or whatever, right? Or
Yeah,
like
yeah,
one thing, but like you have no control over the total picture, right? And then as the company gets smaller and smaller and smaller, as an engineer, you definitely get more and more and more influence over what that ultimate product looks like, right? So when I started at Silencer Co., we had 450 employees, but our engineering team was like three full-time designers, right?
Hmm.
So we had very direct influence over everything that we produced because we were the guys that were touching everything, right? And we would work
Right.
collaboratively to produce products. So there was a lot of that sense of ownership where like things that come out of your brain end up on the final product and end up in video games and, all sorts of all over the
Sure.
place. And you have a very good sense of ownership for the ideas and the concepts. But at the same time, you have zero ownership or reward out of the commercial success of the product, right? So you get paid your salary whether or not the product flops or whether it's a wild success, which is good and bad, right? So,
Right.
you have less risk. I mean, ultimately you always have risk as an employee because you could
Sure.
get fired at any moment, right? Or laid off or the company could fold or whatever, right? So there's this false sense of security that you have as an employee. But like, if you kind of put that aside, there's not as much risk tied to the success of a product when you're an employee, right? So,
Right.
the Silencer Co. Maxim 9 pistol, right? Like nobody knows that Rex Allen had a big influence in what that became, right? Like nobody knows who I am, but people in the industry know who Silencer Co. is
Right.
and what that pistol is. So the company gets all of the recognition, but at the same time, they're the ones taking the risk for the most part. Um,
Right.
so it's definitely a unique balance there versus like now, if I were to say, okay, I'm going to develop a silencer and create a silencer brand called Mute Silencers, which I may or may not already have. Like I own all of that, right? So
Sure.
if the product goes well and all of a sudden sales go wild, then I reap all of the benefits of that versus if I'm just a contracted employee, like I fulfill my contract work and then they go out and make millions of dollars off of the product. So
Yeah.
ownership as an engineer is definitely an interesting thing, right? Because it's really interesting when you like get hired onto a new company, like you are essentially giving them everything that's inside your brain. You like fill out a disclosure of like, these are my patents, these are my previous inventions, these are all the ideas that I had before I started working here that you can't steal from me. And then the second they start paying you, they essentially own anything that comes out of your brain. So it's like kind of scary, right?
Wow.
To like if you're inspired by something at work, like technically they own that idea that you were inspired to have, right? So it's this really weird balance of IP ownership and where that gets assigned and who owns it. But like when you're an employee as an engineer, like you're selling your brain. It's really kind of a weird thing.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's bizarre too, because you look at like you would think that when designers come on, right, in graphic design or really any role in marketing, that the same thing would apply, but that's not always the case. In a lot of places, or you can have several, side hustles, so to speak, right? And you can come with all kinds of things, and they're yours still.
Yeah. Yeah. So as an engineer, like this, cause I started doing Stoke stuff, while I was still an employee. Right. And I had a very open agreement with my boss at the time to like, hey, we have a gentleman's handshake. I'm not going to work on anything competitive. Just kind of the happenstance of how it all happened. Like I just ended up not having a non-compete.
Mm.
So that kind of helped. There was no legally binding that I had that said I couldn't do stuff. So we just kind of had a gentleman's handshake. But previously, my whole entire career, I have always had an active non-compete. So without explicit permission from my employer, I couldn't really use my skills to do any sort of side hustling or side gig work. And a few occasions I wanted to and like had a client that wanted to pay me to do work. And I asked my employer, like, hey, can I do this? And they're like, nope.
Wow.
So it was a really interesting situation. And, as I'm looking to hire someone, like I certainly understand that, like if I hire someone to be a graphic designer for my business, it kind of gets gray if they're out soliciting that same work that's kind of in competition with, me as an employer or as the owner of Stoke. I would also go after that same work, right? So it's like competing against your employer
Right.
is never a good idea. But For me, like one of the reasons I kind of branched off from like trying to do engineering consulting was it just made more sense, and it was a lot more cut and dry of like, hey, you're paying me to be an engineer. Like I'm over here doing marketing and creative and making videos, and like that's
Totally
not
different.
in competition. So as long
Right.
as I didn't work with a competitor of the company, then I was kind of good to go, according to that verbal agreement that we had.
Right. Interesting. I think it's cool about the fact that you got right. You're in engineering and you're working in like the firearms industry, and I think that that gives you a unique perspective into marketing inside of that industry, right? With Stoke now,
Yeah.
and like similar to me when I was working at our local airport, the Sanford Orlando International Airport. I would on my time off would go grab my camera out of my car and come out and I would shoot videos for the marketing team of the airport. And
Yeah.
there were a lot of times where I would like have to explain to the marketing team how an airport works because they're hired on from, the medical industry, or one
Yeah.
lady was from like broadcast television. She knew nothing about how airports work, but I had worked in the airport since I graduated high school, you know what I mean, in all kinds of different
Yeah.
jobs. It gave me a really unique perspective to help that team understand what an airport does. So like with you coming out of firearms industry, does that help you get more gigs or contracts with people in the firearms industry for marketing with Stoke?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes and no. So I think probably, I mean, if I had to guess, probably half of my clientele has come from that industry. Connections that I previously have had, or people that knew people that knew people. So a lot of that has come from connections from the firearm industry, and then a portion of that are people who used to be in the industry and are now working somewhere else. But because we have that tie and that connection, that I end up doing work for them there. But at the same time, like having that experience definitely has proved to be very valuable. So one of my like coolest clients right now is a company that's in kind of the crypto web 3.0 world.
Oh, okay.
And we're creating NFTs based on like firearm CAD data, right? So it's like this perfect mesh of like my engineering background and my creative background. And ultimately, like that's why I got approached to do the job, was because this guy, I actually had interviewed with him, when I was kind of in this transitionary phase, and turned down a job offer with him as graciously as I could, right? But he kind of knew that I was going off to start my own company. And in doing that, he knew that I was in this creative space, but he also knew about my engineering background. So he calls me up and he's like, dude, I think I got the perfect project for you. It's going to be big. It's going to be all this stuff, but it's like this mesh between the engineering and the creative world. So I've been able to come into that and really like blow them away with what I've been able to produce.
Hmm.
And it's been pretty fun to be able to kind of bridge the gap between those two worlds.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important to know where your strengths are and know what you know and know what you don't know. And especially like with you, like there's a lot outside of firearms industry. I don't want to make it seem like, you're only in firearms, but it's important to play to your strengths, especially when you're trying to build, a new company or a new brand to definitely utilize that network that you already have standing.
Yeah.
Speaking of the firearms industry, outdoors firearms is kind of like a faux pas topic in today's
Yeah.
day, right? And especially as
Yeah.
a freelance videographer, designer, whatever, as a company with Stoke, anybody who's trying to get contract work, um, having firearms industry cannot always, benefit you, having that on your
Yeah.
resume. So can you just talk about how that has helped and how it hasn't helped?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's mostly not helping. I mean, for those that don't know and are maybe familiar with other industries that are kind of in the same boat, like firearms companies or companies that are related to the firearms industry are very, you know, very akin to like cannabis, right? So we have a lot of the same restrictions as far as like, what we're able to do as far as running ads. I mean, ads are virtually non-existent on any of the mainstream social platforms, right? So like as far as like running a marketing agency and trying to get firearms clients, like anything that a traditional agency would do is like not game for us, right? So we can't run ads, so like our strategy has to be drastically different than other people, right? So you've got that going against you, and then you also kind of have all of the big social media platforms that have don't even know what you'd call it, like shadow banned our entire industry, right? So when you kind of get on the radar of big social as a firearm junkie or whatever, right? You get this little black mark on the back end of your account and they just make it harder for you to grow, you know? So you just don't get that viral outreach that you can if you're not associated with that, shadow banned industry. So it definitely makes it difficult to run a marketing agency inside the firearms industry. So
Right.
I've actually made a relatively conscious decision to kind of separate Stoke from the firearms industry. So I've got another brand called Max Effective that is my, it's a licensed federal. I have a federal firearms license, and I'm a gun shop. We'll call it a gun shop. Like I don't
Yeah.
have a
Right.
physical gun shop, a license to be a gun shop. And that was always one of my dreams, was to have a legit one. But I've kind of pivoted and turned that brand into the essentially it's the Stoke for the firearms industry, right? So there's a little bit of a separation there, to where Stoke isn't really doing firearm stuff. I'm doing firearm stuff, but I'm showcasing all of that through this Max Effective brand instead of through Stoke, to kind of shield Stoke from having any of that, black mark on any of my social accounts, or getting shadow banned or whatever, content throttled.
Right. Right. Which plays into an interesting topic of, you know, censorship and big tech that we don't have to get into today because it's kind of a can of worms to unpack.
Yeah.
I'm having Brad Luttrell on the podcast here in a couple of weeks, so he and I will inevitably unpack that topic of discussion. So
yeah, for sure.
But in talking about marketing, and we've already had Justin Rowe on this podcast and Nick Jetta, who are really big in the marketing space. Let's bring up LinkedIn. Let's talk about this. So the reason you and I met through LinkedIn, and that is a space that I tell everybody I don't like social media other than LinkedIn. You know what I mean? I'm not very prevalent on Instagram or anything like that, which probably is not very good for somebody who does video and photography work.
Yeah, we both probably ought to be on Instagram a little more than we are, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. But LinkedIn to me is not just a safer space, but for me it's more focused. You know what I mean? And it doesn't have such a broad outreach that you just kind of get lost in nonsense. It tends to be very focused on, professional work and doing things that will benefit people, not necessarily just there to sell a product, And so with LinkedIn, right? And obviously as a content developer or designer, most of your business is business to business. What does LinkedIn play, or what role does LinkedIn play in growing Stoke?
Yeah. So, I mean, you bring up an interesting point there, talking about, whether you're a business to business company, B2B, or you're a B2C, or direct to consumer or whatever, right? Like at the end of the day, all businesses are P2P businesses, right? Mm-hmm. So people to people. So like, I don't sell my service to some unnamed no people industry AI robot that's like, yes, we want to purchase from Stoke, right? Like that doesn't happen, right? So like I connect with a person that has influence at a business, right? So maybe they're a business owner, or maybe they're a marketing director or whatever, right? So I'm connecting with people on LinkedIn, and those people have either their own purse strings or they're in control of the purse strings of the business, right? They've got a budget and they're looking to engage some sort of service, right? So unique is kind of unique. LinkedIn is unique because it's virtually untapped. I mean, not completely, but it's still very new, in that creators are starting to get on LinkedIn and market their business, which is a portion of why you do it, I guess. But like another portion is just to help other businesses either learn the stuff you learn, or kind of position yourself as that solution when they're ready to start paying for it, that they think of you instead of someone else, right, through your content. So my goal on LinkedIn is, not unique by any means, but I think it's refreshing compared to a lot of the other social media channels in that I'm constantly trying to provide free value to people so that they can essentially learn to do what I do for free, right? So
Right.
I'm giving away everything that I know. I mean, and certainly like there's a limit to how much time I can put into it because at the end of the day, like I have to do things that make money,
For
right?
sure.
But as much as I can, I'm just giving away my knowledge and experience and insights on LinkedIn for free, in efforts to help people be able to do the things that I could do for their business, do it for themselves, right? And inevitably, a couple things happen there. Maybe they start getting people to start doing anything on their own is the hardest part, right? So a lot of the soapboxes I get on are like, hey, start making videos for your brand or start doing this or start doing that, right? And some of the people like have started, and it's been really cool to kind of see how my influence has helped people get over the hump to either help their business forward or help their personal brand forward to kind of give them a leg up, when they enter the job market or if they're looking for a new job or whatever. So LinkedIn is this kind of new space, and it's transitioned for me like forever. I thought it was just like you go post your resume on there and like keep, your job history up to date with a bunch of bullet points that talk about what you did at all these jobs. And like I've always had the employee mindset on LinkedIn,
Right.
to where I wasn't ever really using it as a social media tool at all. I've only recently, since starting Stoke, have I even started to be active on LinkedIn at all. So over the
Right.
last year, I've connected with almost 2,000 new people in a year.
Wow.
And like it's pretty insane, how much my LinkedIn experience has changed from when I started posting and started getting active on the platform. Because when I did, it had the old Rex, everything, so it was just my engineering resume, and all of my connections were either engineering coworkers or salespeople that sell crap to people who have engineering director on their title or whatever, So
Yeah.
I had a lot of really weird, irrelevant connections for what I was trying to do. I mean, go figure, you're going to pivot your career
Yeah.
360 and like you're going to run into that, but over the last year, it has really changed. And recently, I mean, LinkedIn has started to become a business treasure trove to where the content that I've been creating, there's all these people that see that and don't interact, right? And I think that's probably one of the biggest like nuggets of advice that I would have for people who are thinking about getting started on LinkedIn is like, yeah, you're going to have those people who are kind of in that creative mindset on there. And those, for the most part, are going to be the people that interact with your posts, right? So the Rexes and the Joshes out there are going to be in there liking and commenting because we get it,
Right.
right? We understand because we are creating, we understand what a like means and what it means when you click see more or what it means when you comment. Like that helps the other creator. So as we are interacting, we're commenting, we're adding value every chance we get on the platform, right?
Right.
But there's all these other people on there that are not doing that. They don't know that that even exists. They don't know why you would interact. They're just not activated, right? And like, you have to remember that those people are watching your content and they're seeing it. And you have to remember that you're speaking to those people and not just the other active people on LinkedIn.
Right.
So, I mean, I want to say this was last week, right? I made a post and a guy liked it that I had never seen interact with my content ever, right? And I'm like, who is that guy? Like, we're connected, right? Because I'm kind of the idea that you just connect with anybody that reaches out, and I try to reach out to people I think are interesting and
Sure.
just to connect and stay in touch with their content and whatever, right? So me and this guy were already connected. So, first degree connection. I click on his profile and I see that he runs like a pretty cool company. And I'm like, that's neat. Like, I just want to meet him, kind of like I met you.
Yeah.
And I just messaged him and reached out. I was like, hey, tell me a little bit about your company. Like, I see you're out there in Idaho. That's cool. I've got some friends up there, blah, 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 right? Just pretty simple. First time I'd ever messaged the dude, even though we were already connected, right?
Right.
He messages back and says, Rex, we have been following your LinkedIn content for a long time. We really like it. We would love to have a chat. Let me introduce you to my director of marketing. So director of marketing reaches out, friend requests me. We set up a meeting like 2 days later, talk about their business, talk about what I do, what they do, what they're looking for, where they're at. the alignment was like perfect because they're a firearm company looking for help with kind of brand strategy and identity and stuff like that. And then down the road content. And like we had a verbal agreement of a contract on the first phone call, had a
Wow.
contract signed within 2 days, and like they're a new client, right? So we went from like, didn't even know who they were on the face of the planet to like new contract in the course of a week, all because of me being an active participant on LinkedIn and sharing value for free, teaching people how to do what I do, teaching people how I think. Like, it's magical. Like, it's so cool. So like anybody who's if you're seeing this and you're not on LinkedIn, which is unlikely because people who are going to see it for me are going to be on LinkedIn, probably
Yeah.
for you the same, right? But like
Yep.
if you're watching this and you're not active on LinkedIn, get active on there. Even
Yeah.
if you're an employee, like that can turn into such a huge asset for your career that like I can't even imagine not being on LinkedIn now,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting to talk to different people and their philosophies, right? And you have people like yourself who like give out all of the free information, right? Give the whole system out. This is how I do everything, totally transparent. And Justin Rowe is the same way. He gives out all of his content for free. Just tells everybody, hey, here's the model. He literally made a post, said, this is everything that we do. This is the whole model, blueprint, take it, steal it. And he said in the podcast, it's all about time versus money, right? If you have more time, then you're going to put the time in to learn it. But if you have the revenue to support it, you will. And a lot of people have different philosophies when it comes to developing content or what they're doing on LinkedIn, right? And in your case, you're giving out information for free and you're hoping that exactly what that interaction is what happens, right? That people see your content, they see the value you have to provide, and eventually it translates into somebody coming on board to be a new client. And then you have people like Nick Jetta who do the very same thing, right? They're producing content with the hopes that those people will either get value from their content, but ultimately for their business, come on board and become a new client. And then you have people like me who don't have any of those things, who don't have a clear landing place for customers. And I'm fine with that now, right? I'm still growing, I'm still developing.
Yeah.
That's part of what this podcast is, learning from people who have done this before me. So I'm working on some things and I'm chewing on some things. I think I know what I'm going to do. But really, what you said about it being magical is so true. I mean, even for people like me who don't have a very clear place for people to land, it's still something that I grow and I benefit from, right? And I've learned tons and tons of things from yourself, from Nick Jetta, from Ben Owen, who's on LinkedIn and doesn't do a ton of marketing content, but more like leadership content and things with a bunch of stuff with like with Flanders Fields and just helping people out with the Afghanistan evacuation and everything. And so there's a ton of stuff that you can learn and grow from the people on LinkedIn. It's not all about dollars and cents 100% of the time, which I think is unique from Instagram. Right, where like Instagram is very much like you might convert somebody into a sale, but it's also like, hey, look at how great I am. Like, I look really great. It's all about vanity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and LinkedIn is special because like you don't have an avatar on LinkedIn, right? I mean, I guess you could, and I'm sure people are like that on there, but like for the most part, it's like your real face, your real name attached to like the real company that you work for.
Right.
Like it's less, I mean, certainly like it's still kind of a highlight reel, like
Sure.
I don't know. Like I don't know that I find a ton of value in like seeing everybody's like negative content, right? Like I want to hear what's working for people and what's going good and stuff like that,
Absolutely.
And the occasional like, hey, this is what I learned from like this mistake I made, great. But like, Instagram is just this like fairy tale highlight reel, like look at my perfect edited picture of me on the beach with my family or whatever. And it's like not real life, right? Whereas like LinkedIn, right. I feel like I can say, okay, I want to work. I mean, this just happened yesterday. I mean, this was all public, right? So a guy named Gary Bird, had never heard of him before in my life, right? He runs a dental marketing agency. It's like a 8-figure business, right? So like yesterday he posts like, hey, I'm looking for somebody to take my podcast videos and syndicate them into vertical videos for TikTok and YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels. And I need somebody to do carousels for me on LinkedIn and carousels for Instagram and like all this stuff. And my little radar is like, bing, 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 bing,
Yeah,
bing.
yeah.
Like, dude, this is perfect for you. This is like exactly what you're good at, right? But I'd never heard of him, right? So one of my friends, contact that I had met on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
had a video call, an intro call just to get to know him, just like you and I did.
Yeah.
I had already helped him get a client. And he just comments and he's like, Rex, dude, this sounds like it's right up your alley, right? So I jump over there, see the post. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a gold mine. So I check out this guy. His name's Gary Bird. He runs like a marketing agency for dentists, dental practices, right? So like hyper focused in on a niche,
Right.
which like I probably should do at some point, but like not there yet, but whatever, right? So I jump on his TikToks and I'm like, oh man, this guy's got some rad TikTok videos. Like he's doing good. Like I think this would be a fun, content wise, because he talks a lot about entrepreneurship and leadership and all this stuff of like how to run an agency. I'm like,
Mm.
if I'm editing videos for this guy, like I'm gonna soak up so much good
Yeah.
information, right? So I'm like, I want to work for this dude. So I took one of his TikToks and I broke it down, point by point. And I made, I branded, based on the colors in his TikTok videos and all that jazz. I'd never seen his brand book or anything, right? So just based on like my best idea, I like made a branded LinkedIn carousel kind of going through that TikTok of like, this is what he said in the TikTok. And it was like, one of those swipey
Sure.
carousel posts. And I posted it and like tagged him in it. And I was like, Gary Bird said this. So I made this. This is what I learned, blah, blah, blah. And like he reaches out, he's like, holy freak, dude, that was so awesome. I'm gonna put you in touch with my project manager. So like we have this whole email chain going of like
Wow.
me starting to work with him, right? And then he goes on his TikTok account. I mean, it's a newer account, but he's got like
Sure.
35,000 followers.
Not bad.
And he does this whole video and he's like flips up his cell phone. He's like, you want to know how to make a bunch of money for your company really fast? And then he like pulls up my LinkedIn profile on the video and he's like, this guy Rex, I made a post and said I was looking for this. And he like opens my profile and he's like, this guy, and he scrolls down and he's like, he looked at what I said I wanted. He actually started doing the work of like what I said I needed. And like he sent it to me and like now we're gonna start working together, So it's just like all you people sitting on the sidelines just hoping business is gonna come to you. It's not gonna happen. Like you
Right.
have to be proactive, right? And like I'm busy. Like I didn't really have time to go do that, but like I really want to work with this guy. So I was just like, whatever. I'll just like stay up till midnight, finishing all the work that I didn't do because I was making this carousel for this guy. And like, I mean, we're not signed yet, but like I think we're headed towards that pretty quickly. It's
Right.
like one day. I've heard this said before, like on LinkedIn specifically, like you're one connection away or one DM away from your life completely changing.
I want to see
Right?
that on a t-shirt. That needs to be a Rex Allen or a Stoke t-shirt, man.
Stoke
Start running
t-shirt.
a merch brand right there.
Yeah. I mean, I've thought about it a lot. So I've got a new guy. I think I've got a new guy like all
awesome.
but hired. So like I'm drafting up an employment contract right now, and like I think next week he's going to start. And one of the things he's done a lot of in the past is merch design and stuff. So it's definitely like a potential on the docket of like doing some of that kind of stuff. So
yeah, if nothing else, that t-shirt I want to see come out because I want it. I want it. So you bring up a good point about working for free. So let's talk about a lot of people do not like the idea of giving creative work, doing exactly what you did for that guy, right? You didn't have a contract. He didn't say, hey, I'm going to pay. You just went on your own and you did this carousel for free for this guy, did research, did an outline, everything. Like that's a lot of work. I don't know how long it took you.
Yeah.
But that's not like a...
Yeah, I mean, especially like building a branded carousel, right? I could have made one according to my brand and it would have gone a lot faster, right? But like doing the work that he was looking for, going that next level made me stand out more than anybody else that wanted to work with him,
Right, which is a good point. And I want people to realize that sometimes I wrote an article about this before I'd ever done anything with LinkedIn. I was like not trying to, but I wrote an article about working pro bono can really be that extra leg up that you need for contract work or even getting a job, right? Signing on for your 9 to 5, doing a little bit of work to show your talent makes you stand out, and being so restrictive with yourself and your talents that you say like, nah, I'm not going to do any work unless I get paid can be like the biggest killer to your ability to land a contract.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, I mean, going back to something that you said earlier in the call, like it comes down to time versus money, right? Like if your time see, what's the right word? If you've got a lot of time and not a lot of money, then do work for free.
Right.
Like you've got the time, you don't have enough clients. So like start there. Right. But if you're the other way, right, you've got a lot of work, you've got a lot of clients and you have no time, like, yeah, don't work for free. You know, you're trading paid work versus not paid work. So like, don't do that. Right. But like, for example, yesterday, like I saw a pretty lucrative opportunity, right? The dude seemed really cool. So like, I just want to work with him because he seems cool.
Yeah.
Seems like he's got a cool company. I feel like I could learn a lot from working with him. But then at the same time, like I had an opportunity to kind of publicly talk about this whole thing, right? This idea of like doing free work or what, right? So like that wasn't totally altruistic of me just like doing free work for this guy, right? Like
Sure.
I made a branded post for him and like left it branded just for his stuff that like if he wanted to post it he could, right? But like there was no conversation, so it doesn't perfectly match, you know, his branding and stuff because I had never seen the brand book, but now I have because they sent it to me because I like made an impression, you know?
Right.
But like I also, you know, put Gary Bird times Stoke at the top of one of the posts and I posted that carousel on LinkedIn and it's gotten 3 times the reach of a normal post, you know? So like 5,000 people now have seen what I did yesterday.
Dang.
And like that stuff compounds and, you know, you jump on more calls and people are like, dude, you're good at what you do. We want to work with you, you know? And like, so I don't know. I don't work for exposure, right? People are like, yeah, do all this work for us and we'll, you know, exposure, blah, blah, blah. You know, that's the conversation we have all the time. Like, I'm not going to do that, right? Because like, if I make a video for XYZ brand, I'm not getting any exposure out of that. Like, they're getting exposure because it's their video. They're not going to be like, check out this video that this guy made for us. It's going to be like, check out our cool video, you know? So like working for exposure is fake, you know, but like, it's not real. Like that's not a thing.
Right.
So if that's the case, then I would say, yeah, don't do free work and trade for exposure because that just doesn't happen. But like, if there's an opportunity for you to do something that's going to help you get noticed by a super huge brand or whatever, like do it.
Right. You got to get that train going. And when it's stagnant and you're not getting clients in and you're not getting work, you know, presented to you, sometimes you need to put in extra effort from somewhere else to get that process going. And I mean, things like branded videos that you do for other companies are not always great. You know what I mean? And I don't know if you saw it, but I did the watch band I'm actually wearing right now. Right. I like shot this video for this company in California and it's just like a guy and his wife making these, you know, paracord watch bands, but I love them. I have 2 of them. I love these bands. And so I shot like a YouTube short of their watch, right?
Yeah, I've seen it.
They like freaked out. They loved it. They were super happy. I think it's still on their website, on their homepage. Yeah. And then I made another one that kind of, you know, they sent me a free watch band and I made another one that's kind of more my style. You know what I mean? It was more like, you know, dark and had this kind of like dark and moody kind of feel to it, you know, which I love. And I made it and I don't think they were that excited about it. I don't know if they're probably not going to ever listen to this, but they did not seem happy. They did not seem happy with the end product. But sometimes when you develop content for that person, right, that's only going to work for them. And when brand recognition kicks in, you can't really get exposure from somebody else's brand for your own brand. You know what I mean? If you're developing something with their brand in mind, even if your name's on it, it's not going to naturally convert most people over to like, oh, that little name there in the bottom corner, Rex Allen. Oh, maybe I should look into him. Maybe he sounds cool.
Yeah, I mean, for example, like say that guy was like, oh yeah, I'll pay you by exposure by making a TikTok, right? Like his TikTok has had 5,000 views, right? Like that's pretty good. And like the whole entire post was about me, right? Like my name's all over it. He talks about me. He tags me in it. Like there's no more exposure than you can ask for than that, right? If I was like, hey, I'll make you a carousel if you make a TikTok about me, which wasn't the conversation. But if that was the conversation, he fulfilled on it, right? Like he made a TikTok post all about me on his channel that's got 37,000 followers, right?
Right.
So of those 5,000 views, I've gotten like 3 new people that followed me. So like, Exposure's freaking fake. Like it's
It
not
is.
real. Like
Right.
people don't watch Gary Bird's content and then like see a video about Rex Allen and then all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, that guy. They just
Right.
don't do that.
Right.
So
Yeah. I mean, even content,
don't
right?
let people do it, right? Don't let
Yeah.
people try to pay you an exposure. It's
No,
fake.
it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I think, man, it has to do a lot with, what kind of content you're making. And this plays pretty well into my next point of like, you can get, right. Everybody, like back in the day, especially with like YouTube, everybody's like, oh, I want a shout out, like give me a shout out, which is like cool, like that could help you. But the problem is that like, so I didn't do hardly anything on LinkedIn that was good or significant, didn't convert to anything, didn't even grow until like 2 months ago, 2 or 3 months, right around when you and I met. And it really kicked off with, I just like got kind of like sick and tired of doing nothing and wanted to build something that was my own. And so I made this video that's just like really honest and transparent. It was kind of like grumpy. And it was just like, I think New Year's resolutions are stupid. Like, I just think they're dumb. And, and Ben Owen like commented on it and was like, this is awesome. This guy's great. And like for the next several posts I made, commented on it and like grew my reach and engagement, which was great. And I was super excited, super grateful. Ben, thank you so much. But really what he did was made more work for me. You know what I mean? Because you can get all the shout outs you want, but if you don't like keep up on things, it's going to do you no good. You know what I mean? It's not going to do anything for you. And so consistency is a lot more important than I think people realize when it comes to LinkedIn or life in general. You know what I mean? Even when you sign contract work, if you're consistently putting out good work, consistently giving good communication, a person is going to work with you again. If they have a contract, if they have something they need your services for, they're going to work for you again. But if you're like kind of spotty on communication or you're late to meetings or whatever it is, they're not going to. And this is just a principle to life. You know what I mean? So if you're listening, you're showing up late to work, stop. Yeah, show up on, that's literally the least amount of effort that you can put into your job. But when it comes to growing a business, there's so much more than just consistency, right? And you can grow, but you hit a plateau. So what do you think your solution to growth that won't grow anymore with consistency?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think consistency is super important. Like even on LinkedIn, like the more consistently you can show up, the more that snowball can roll down the hill, right?
Right.
But as a business owner, like you can only be consistent to a certain end, and then you reach a peak, right? So right now, like I am being limited by my bandwidth, right? So like I currently do not have enough time to do all my client work and market my business and even think about working on my business, right? So I've kind of reached this plateau of just like, there's no more that I can do. Like there's not enough hours in the day for me to get everything done right now. So like I've reached a time plateau, right? And the only thing I can do at this point is like increase my rates up the wazoo and watch half my clients leave and like keep working with the ones that don't. Like that would be one way, right? Because I could free up half my time and, I could do that, or I can do that kind of and increase my bandwidth, right? So that's what I've been focusing on right now is like I have this vision of like having a 20-person company where there's like some fun stuff going on all the time and like doing really good work. And like it can't get to 20 if you don't get to 2. So right now I'm on this mission to get from 1 to 2. And I think we're finally there. And I'm really excited to see what that change brings, for my clients. And then at the same time, what it allows me to focus on, because I'm not, the only one being focused on fulfillment. So I'm excited to kind of see that change, and hopefully it goes well, and hopefully 2 becomes 3 and 3 becomes 4 and then 4 becomes 5 with Josh coming to Missouri and work for me.
I've
tried
that.
And he keeps saying no like a little punk.
Yeah, right. I don't know if I want to leave Florida and go to Missouri, but I appreciate the vote of confidence there.
I mean, you might be able to get out of the closet. You can afford some pretty cool stuff here in Missouri compared to what I imagine Florida is like real estate wise.
Yeah, right. For reference, so that people understand, I work in a closet, not coming out of the closet. I'm married to a woman happily. Thank you very much. But But yeah, I mean, that plays into the question of like, would you rather have like really like five really high paying clients or 1,000 really low paying clients? And I see posts all the time of people who say like, oh, I'd rather have five like ballers who pay me like tons of money and I only focus on those five. But I've also heard of other people like, no, I'd rather package something small, take a small rate and reach more people with that. So there's really, I don't think there is a right answer to that question. It's just a
Yeah.
matter of your business model. Um, but I think that when it comes to, I think what it boils down to is how much time you have as an individual. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if you're by yourself, obviously, yes, it's easier to have five people who pay crazy amounts of money because then you in your brain only have to track five people and what you're doing for those five
Yeah.
clients. But if you have a large company, you know, with 20 people, then it gets a lot easier to have multiple clients. You know what I mean? You can even put, you know, account managers over certain clients,
Yeah.
and that's all they do is manage those people. And then you've created
Yeah.
basically the same system, but on a larger scale. There's really,
Yep.
I don't think there is a right answer to that question. You know?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I really value the relationships I have with clients and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, for me to try to do 1,000 of that would be impossible,
Right.
right? But at the same time, I don't have five that pay me a lot either, you know. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of
Yeah.
in this middle ground of like, you know, having all sorts of, you know, different clients with different needs, and that's one of the hard things about where I'm at. You know, I've been doing this for a year, and I've grown and I've morphed as I've been going, right? And like still trying to find that sweet spot of like, okay, do I, you know, just kind of, I've been saying this a lot, like flea flick. Do I flea flick the bad clients or the clients that don't fit what I'm trying to accomplish and
Right.
really hone in on like one offering that I can get really good at? Or do I kind of continue to just be all over the place? I think it's fun being all over the place, you know, having clients that are, you know, focused, cause I do this whole range. I keep smacking this microphone. I do this whole range of like work, right? So it starts from the brand identity and brand strategy all the way through the brand identity creation and visual assets for a brand. And then kind of once you cross that threshold of like releasing your brand to the world, and you've got your website and your logo and your identity and your mission statement and all that jazz, then we kind of cross this hump to where it's about content and disseminating your brand beyond that, right? So I kind of cover everything along that trajectory of establishing the brand and then supporting the brand. And it makes a lot of sense, I think, you know, from a longevity standpoint. It's like everything a business needs to become a business and then grow the business. But I've got clients that are all along that phase, right? So one day I'm over here, one day I'm over here, and sometimes I take an engineering job here and there. And it's just like all over the place, right? So for me, to some extent, focusing in would probably be beneficial.
Right. Which begs the question, you know, what is your niche and what's the benefit of niching down? And I know that, like, so I don't talk about what I do, my 9 to 5 job a lot, but I work for a company that is a marketing firm in the high quality stone restoration industry, which every time I told somebody that this past weekend and they just stared at me like, what the heck does that even mean? Like, what are you talking about? And so
Yeah.
they have like gone so specific that it's an industry that absolutely has demand. You know what I mean? If you have marble countertops or granite countertops, or you have marble all over your house, like in the floor or anything like that, then chances are good, if you want to take care of your home, then you know that you need to hire a high quality stone restoration expert. And so there's definitely a market for it. So I mean, yeah, you would probably benefit from finding a niche, but I think that there can be too far down. I think that it's possible to definitely go too specific. You know, for example, one that I can think of is if you ran a company, I'll use airports because that's like my bread and butter. But
Yeah.
if you had a company that was like, we clean the terminals of airports and that is all we do, and then you were the marketing firm that represented people who only did that, you might find one or two companies that would hire you for marketing, because like a cleaning company is they're gonna clean malls, they're gonna clean airports, they're gonna clean superstores,
Yeah.
they're gonna, you know what I mean, there's gonna be a wider range of that. But if you go so specific, you're gonna stifle yourself out, and if you're too broad, you're not gonna be able to
Yeah.
hit anything. You know what I mean? You're just gonna be throwing darts at a wall.
I mean, yeah, with that example, if you're just like, I'm a cleaning company, who wants to just hire a cleaning company, right?
Right.
Like, are you a house cleaning company or a corporate cleaning company or a small business cleaning company or a mega corporation cleaning company, right? Because like
Sure.
those are probably appropriate niches. It's niche, by the way, not niche.
Oh, my bad. It's
Like
my French
I'm
side
just
coming
kidding.
out.
That's like, yeah, that's like a whole joke that seems like exists on the internet. But like
Is it
that's
actually
probably
niche?
it says both on the dictionary. Yeah, I
I've
think
never
niche
even
is
looked it
like
up.
a more like, yeah, because I've had this conversation quite a few times. It says
Oh,
both.
okay.
But I feel niche is a little bit more American.
Oh, well, now you're saying,
Um,
now I'm going to say niche for the rest of my life
yeah,
just
you
because it
should.
bothers you.
Yeah, do it. It doesn't bug me. I just think it's funny.
I got you.
But like that's probably an appropriate niche, right? To be like, okay, we are a cleaning company for large businesses or whatever, right? Because like
Hmm.
you have the equipment and the skills and the personnel and the things needed to be able to go into a high rise building and clean it versus
Sure.
like mom and pop, like we clean houses. Like you're going to have a lot different equipment and different specialties to go be a house
Right.
cleaner than you are to be a corporate cleaner, right? So
Right.
like having that differentiation in your business is probably not only needed but like necessary to be able to function and you know progress, right? So Mary maids or whatever, like that's clearly they're maids. They come and clean houses versus whatever
Right.
corporate cleaner, right? So for me, it's similar. Like you can either niche down by industry, right? So I pick firearms industry. I mean, it seems like a lot of people do that, right? They
Hmm.
say, okay, I'm in a marketing agency for dental practices or multi-site dental practices or whatever, right? I mean,
Right.
you niche kind of by industry and then maybe even the type of business inside that industry. Or I'm a marketing agency, creative agency for firearm companies or for huge firearm companies or for small ones or whatever. But like you can also niche by what your service offering is, right? So if I'm the
Hmm.
only company, and not saying that I am, but if I'm the only company that offers brand strategy, brand identity, brand visuals and creation, and then content creation, if I'm the only agency that does that, I can market that as my niche of like being a total package for a brand. And that can be applicable to any industry, right? So
Right.
kind of that's what I'm trending towards currently is just honing in on what that offer looks like and then how to package it up nicely so that people from different industries would see that and say, oh yeah, that's what I need.
Right. Right. And the reality is you run an operation so that you could really take over, probably, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, the entire content creation process from a firm, that they wouldn't have to really do anything at all, that Stoke would
Yeah.
just handle all of that.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think is definitely something that stands you apart. I mean, if somebody asked you, like, what makes you different from any other marketing agency I could interact with, I think that would be definitely a huge selling point. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a marketing agency. That's what sets me apart. Like most
hmm,
marketing agencies focus on analytical marketing and numbers and boring crap. Like I'm a creative agency. Like I can help you with the marketing components, but that's not really my focus. So
hmm,
me being able to do the create, like most marketing agencies are not creative, right? Maybe they have a component that's creative, but like they're not a creative agency full of designers and video people and kind of people they're made to make things, right? They're full of analytical people with maybe like one person that does some creative here and there. So certainly not the only
hmm.
industry like that, but I think it's more unique than the dime a dozen marketing agencies out there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. And I never really thought about it that way, but you're right. I mean, I'm even thinking about the company I work for. I think there's only two creative. I think me and one other person are the only creative people in the company.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
I
mean, it
never
makes
thought
me
about
think
that.
maybe I'm doing it wrong, right? Like maybe I should be a marketing agency with a couple creative people, but like I feel like a lot of companies have marketing people, but they need help with creative.
Right. Right.
So that's kind of where I chose to focus.
And I think it's hard for companies to find people who can play in marketing because it's really easy to measure somebody's success with analytics, right? Do
Yeah.
you know the analytics? Do you have the education to handle it? Have you taken an SEO course? You know what I mean? All those kinds of things. But it's really difficult to hire somebody who is creative. And
Yeah.
because the creativity ebbs and flows so much, I think that's probably why, the people who are looking at the numbers steer away from hiring a bunch of creative people, because it's a lot easier to look at, okay, this person can give us an ROI consistently. We can measure that. But your creativity, designing those kind of things, maybe not necessarily 100% of the time will it,
Yeah.
translate into numbers. So I don't
Yeah.
want to take too much of your time. So let me get on to your last two questions here. Best advice, worst advice you ever received?
Yeah, so let's see. I think best advice came from Nick Staggy. He started a company about the same time I did, and I'm only now starting to take his advice. But we were talking about starting, creative agency, ad agency, whatever. And he said pretty soon after starting his business, that conversation of working on your business versus in your business, right? And like you can't
Right.
grow if you're constantly working in your business, right? So he had that conversation with somebody very early on, and like he just had bigger cojones than I did, and like he went out the next day and like hired somebody, right?
Oh, wow.
And has continued to hire people. And now, we started at the same time, and he's like got 10 or 12 people working with him, and I'm still like at 1.1, about to be 2, right? So he like just jumped in and did it versus me that like waited until I got to a point where I could justify it, So he just jumped in and did it, and the work came, and I let the work overcome me and then did it, right? So I think I would have figured out a way to do that much earlier, just based on what my goals are as a company is to have a real company and not just me by myself forever.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the best piece of advice that I've gotten. And it took me a while to follow it, but we'll see how it turns out. But right now I'm excited to kind of get over that hump.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of worst advice. People don't really advise me a whole lot, so I don't know that I've really got a whole lot of bad advice. I would say like the American education system kind of gave me the worst advice that I've ever gotten. This is kind of a, not a specific thing, but just the idea that you need to go to school and get good grades and go to college so you can get an education and become hireable and be an employee and put money into your 401k. So maybe at 65, you'll have enough, time or you'll have enough money to retire and enjoy your life. Right. I think that's the biggest load of crock that there is, and the more kind of on the entrepreneur business owner side and taking ownership in things that I do, I see kind of the fallacy of that societal, impression that we make on kids and people as they grow up of just like needing to follow that rigid trajectory of becoming an employee. And there's nothing wrong with being an employee, like there have to be employees to be able to have cool companies, right? So there's certainly nothing wrong with that, but I wish that the system would have taught me about taking ownership and building your own personal brand and doing things to take ownership of your life and your career, so you're not just constantly subject to the whims of the corporate world and hirings and firings and layoffs and all that stuff. Like you don't have to be subject to that. Like you can do things to give yourself some influence or some control over your career destiny. So it's probably, I don't know that that's like a specific like bad advice, but I feel like that's kind of the way the world teaches us.
And that is a wrap for this episode of the Try, Fail, Learn podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave us a rating and review. We'll catch you next time.